Hello, everyone, and welcome to a very special episode of the Last Edit podcast, starring yours truly, Silver Hawkins, the Great,
Citizen Slave, hello there.
and the Amazing.
Wow, you can't cue me up with an amazing. Now I'm gonna sound
course
like
I
a
can.
douchebag. Johnny plays live on Twitch. Johnny, what's up?
And
I'll put links in the description below for all of Johnny's Twitch and YouTube shenanigans, okay? So you can check him out there.
Thanks for having me,
please
guys.
do. It's well worth it. Anyway, we are here to talk about the HBO show Lovecraft Country, a short 10-episode first season. I mean, there's been some talk of a second, though I have a hard time imagining where they would take the show, especially given that they've basically covered the book that was adapted from. But I mean, we'll see.
Have you read the book, by the way?
I have not. No,
Okay.
I'm aware of
talk about
changes.
it.
Yeah, I watched a few bits and pieces after the series, so I'm aware of some stuff that's been altered, but I haven't read it properly now.
I mean, it's my understanding that I mean, we'll get into that, but like the book is actually referenced within the show, which I thought was a pretty nice.
Atticus
nice touch.
holds a book called Lovecraft Country, doesn't he?
Yep.
Yeah. And like the plot line described in that book is basically the plot line of the actual book, where they differ. But yeah, it's an HBO show, produced in part by Jordan Peele, and the showrunner was me. God damn it! Now I have to look it up because I completely forgot her name.
J.J. Abrams is the other, but yeah, Jordan Peele was the one of the central producers on it. And it's got
but I mean, like the main sort of creative force behind the show was let me look it up. God damn it, Misha Green.
Proof that Silver is human,
Misha Green.
doesn't know
Misha
everything.
Yeah.
Sorry, go again. What was the name?
Misha Green.
Misha Green.
And yeah, it sort of it takes place in the 1950s in America during the height of Jim Crow era laws, segregation laws. Takes place sort of across the kind of like the Midwest and the American South. It is a fairly in a lot of ways, it's a show that has a lot of justified anger. I think that really comes through a lot. It's a show. I don't think any of us are really part of its target demographic. I feel it necessary to point out.
Yeah, absolutely.
and we're probably people who have a hard time sort of imagining a lot of the perspective that this show comes from, because we haven't had that experience. We can only sort of imagine it and empathize with it. But it certainly, I think from the very first episode, it offered a really, really compelling experience in terms of sort of relating that experience and that indictment of sort of institutional, racial oppression.
You know, it's kind of interesting, just to give my take on that, because I was brought up in Brazil.
Yeah.
And there, there's really entrenched racism everywhere. But it's a different flavor. It doesn't have that aggression aspect.
Yeah, you don't have sundown counties.
Right. So, watching the show, and in episode 1, they're stopped by this cop car, and they're like challenged, like, if they don't make it out of the county in time, they're, who knows what's gonna happen, right? And they get chased out. Like, I've really never seen anything like that. What I've seen has always been more like demeaning, right? And on the very pejorative side of things, of course, but never seen that level of just like hatred. I don't want to say hatred, because now it's almost like overused. Everybody, hatred. But I think they did a good job with that, and also like toning it down after the first episode, where the backdrop is there and you see it constantly, but it's not such a prevalent thing in episodes,
Right. Yeah, it's not as
it
in your
doesn't
face
dominate
as it is initially.
the narrative as much.
Yeah.
I think we should
Yeah, it
probably-
becomes more. It becomes less forceful in representation. It sets a stall out initially. We know the backdrop. We know the quite overt racism.
Yeah.
Across this entire area of Jim Crow and being chased out of town, as you said, and you're not knowing the end result of that, which is often a lynching or something, or was a lynching. And then the Lovecraftian elements just weave more and more and more into the show, and then the discussion about racism also becomes more metaphorical, more allegorical, more oblique reference than it does overt, which I think is really interesting because it serves both the notion of that oppression being shown effectively, but also this wonderfully fantastic, crazy, magical, cosmical world as well, which just weaves into everything and is entrenched deeply throughout the series.
I think we should probably start by setting up like the characters and the synopsis of the show, which is that basically the main protagonist of the show is Atticus, who is a Korean War veteran. He's just come home from the Korean War, and he goes to see his uncle George, who basically runs a publication that tells African Americans where they can travel safely when they go on vacation in America.
The Green Book.
Yeah, because they can't really go wherever they want. There are areas of the country where they are not welcome. And so George runs this publication, and he's about to head out on a journey. Honestly, I don't even remember. I think there's a letter. No, yeah, they receive a letter from Atticus's father, Montrose, who's gone missing. And it basically takes them out on a journey where George is already headed out on the journey to write his book. And they basically run through the county where Montrose has gone missing as well, just while they're there anyway. And so they head out. They bring along another companion, Leticia, who is sort of she's it's kind of hard to sort of pin her down, but she's
like a freeloader to begin with, almost. She kind of gets what she wants from people, but not much else.
Say.
Yeah.
And the sister of a nightclub singer called Ruby, who wants more in life, who wants to basically be respected and attain a position of recognition and acknowledgement in society that she can't gain entry to because of her skin color. And so they head out on a road trip where they, as Jonny alluded to, run into law enforcement that is not particularly welcoming to them, and are eventually taken to this huge manor house where occult things start to happen. And that's basically where the show begins to really take off. It's also worth bearing in mind that this show is immensely dense. Like the first 2 episodes basically pack in what would be one single season in a lot of other shows.
Yeah.
Where you have a lot of stuff happening in those first two episodes. And then it kind of slows down a little bit after that. But it does still sort of pack a lot of stuff in, especially also in the finale. Where where it feels like they just tried to cram too much stuff in there in too little time, a little bit. And I think that's really sort of the main criticism I have with the show, is that it feels a little bit like that at times. But really, a lot of it is just brilliantly constructed. I mean, the scene where they go to the diner, and they have they've arrived in this small little rural village or town basically, and they go into the diner to have breakfast or eat, and you can tell that the waiter is none too pleased with them. He's a little surprised that these dark-skinned people have just stepped into his diner, and he runs off, and then he gets the sheriff and the basically the pogrom crew, and they notice that the diner's been burned, like in a racial riot earlier, and they need to get out of there, and so they're basically chased out of town.
Yeah,
like that scene is really, really tense and really, really well structured. And then you get
and it goes to show what you said. Like, you never know. I get like in their shoes.
Yeah,
they don't know exactly like where it's safe to go in that sense,
exactly,
right?
yeah.
Because they didn't know. There's not necessarily a sign It's
No.
almost like you gotta feel it out. And
Yeah, I mean they notice it on the way in when they basically
Oh,
run
yeah.
into those guys who run basically the pogrom at the edge of town when they head into the town, and then they go to the diner. So you do get the sense earlier that there is this oppressive atmosphere that, oh, we're not welcome here.
Yeah, it's almost. This might sound a bit odd, but it's almost like Carpenter's They Live at times. There's this weird undercurrent of tension when they're in certain situations, certain environments where you know the neighborhood and the environment are looking at them like the other, like they don't belong. And as Jonny said, not in a more hidden, fabricated way that we have often in society now, in a far
Right.
more overt, out there, we despise who you are,
right.
and that bubbles throughout, especially the first couple of episodes, and then kind of resurfaces here and there in other episodes. Even the haunted house episode, which is that episode 3, I think.
Yeah, that's episode 3.
That's definitely got that sense, the way what happens outside, which we'll get to later. But Letty has to go out there with a baseball bat in the end. The come to blows that the neighborhood has, even though all they're doing is protecting themselves most of the time or trying to survive.
Yeah, for sure. And they run into like afterwards they run into the sheriff who toys with them a lot because they're now in a sundown county, which was a very real thing where basically if you were an African American and you were out after dark, you were subject to sort of whatever punishment people deemed fit.
So that's something I didn't have the context on that when they said it. I didn't know what it was, and then I saw what it meant.
Yeah.
Is there something about sundown? Is it like a curfew thing where?
Yeah, that's basically exactly what it was. It was a curfew
Okay.
thing where if you got caught outside as a black person,
like you're up to no good basically.
Yeah.
Because
and you were liable to get lynched.
Yeah, there were mobs that would go out after sundown specifically for that purpose.
Yeah.
Oh.
Unfortunately, and it's immensely difficult to sort of imagine today for a lot of people, but
yeah, I mean, luckily we're
but it
a
was
long way
very, very real,
away from that. But yeah,
it was a very, very real thing, especially for the people it happened to, unfortunately.
And ever so more prevalent now because of what's been happening in America and a lot of other places around the world. In particular this year, unfortunately, it just throws it into even more sharp relief when you see a series like this, which echoes the history.
Yeah, but they get chased by the sheriff who toys with them, and they manage to escape the county line before dark. But then, of course, the sheriff has set off a roadblock on the other side, so they get captured anyway. And he takes them off into the woods where the intention is, to lynch them or kill them or toy with them or whatever it is. And then they all get mauled to death by, like all the law enforcement police get mauled to death by monsters in the night in the woods.
Yes. Can I just say,
it's really, really solid. Yeah, for sure.
Whatever horrible qualities those policemen have, laziness is not one of them. Like they put a lot of energy into. Like they went out of their way to catch like the protagonists and stuff. Like you don't really see that sort of stuff nowadays. It's almost like they would just be lazy cops nowadays. I feel and
donuts and a coffee in a car. Yeah.
But you mentioned the monsters, right? So that's a recreation of the Shoggoth, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's their version of the Shoggoth.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah. From Lovecraft
in the book, apparently they're quite different, but it's their interpretation of it rather than more of an amalgamation of what they wanted to attain and what was. I think.
Yeah, it's quite different, right? And I think there's
the book Shoggoth is basically more like the one from Lovecraft's books is more of like a blob.
Yes, exactly, with a lot of eyes, right? I think.
Blob. Yeah.
Is it Mountain of Madness? Is it
Mountain of
one
Madness
that
makes one appear?
Describes it, has a good description in it, and these have a lot of teeth, right? So it's much more of a like you're gonna.
They remind me more of Stranger Things.
Yes.
Yeah, the creature design, Demogorgon.
Demogorgon.
Yeah, the creature design seems very, very similar, doesn't it?
There's one thing that felt a little bit out of touch with the Lovecraft material is the fact that in Lovecraft stories, the ones that I've read at least, people never actually see the monster or the whatever it is until it's too late, and then they're dead, right? They're gone at that point. Like when they actually see what it is, basically there's something saying like it's undescribable terror,
Yeah, I mean that's
and
the
they're
moment
dead.
they go insane.
And
Yeah.
they're dead, right? And then here, like already episode 1, they get to see in this case the monster, the Shoggoth or whatever, and they live to tell the story, right? So it's kind of like a different structure.
Yeah, it is. No, it is for sure, and I think it's people need to sort of realize that this show is not really an adaptation.
It's not an actual Lovecraftian.
It's not an adaptation of Lovecraft
story.
mythology.
Yeah.
It is an own thing. Like Lovecraft Country is not really an allusion to Lovecraft's work. It's an allusion to what that sort of part of the country, like Maine and stuff, where Stephen King also puts a lot of his stuff. Is situated. And that's where parts of the show also sort of centers its plot. In those counties,
it's more like a Lovecraftian road movie, if anything. It's more a road movie. It's more akin to a road movie in the way it works and it's structured.
And of course, the name of the show also alludes to like Lovecraft's own racial biases as well, because he was also sort of part of that cultural sort of racial identity that was oppressive.
I guess my expectation was that they were gonna do a lot more Lovecraft stuff in the show.
Right.
That's one of my letdowns because I had like this expectation.
I mean,
we skipped the introduction, but the introduction, like the opening, is this crazy dream sequence, which is very much a Lovecraftian dystopian, right? And
purples and the alien, the red alien girl.
Yeah, because I mean, Atticus, the main character, and his uncle read a lot of Lovecraft. They're both fans of Lovecraft's work, and they just.
But I thought that was a foreshadowing of what was to come.
And I mean, I think that's also understandable because the show's marketing kind of hinted at that. There were some trailers for Comic-Con and stuff that really sort of focused on the whole Lovecraft angle to the show, and I think that was a mistake because that gave people an idea of the show that I don't think was accurate to what the show really is about.
It's not really until episodes 8 or 9. 10 is more like Rise of Skywalker.
The show fundamentally, I mean, Lovecraft Country is not about cosmic horror. It's about real human horror. And the horrors that humans enact upon each other, rather than that of cosmic beings who are
very much
incomprehensible.
So. And at that, I think it's really good. It's just that it kind of sets up that tone initially that, again, I think a lot of people like myself may naively expect it's going in that direction.
I agree.
I think you're completely right.
And if you pick out certain episodes as well, like I already mentioned episode 3, which is ostensibly designed as a haunted house episode. That's what it is.
Yes.
And then we go forward to, I think it's episode 7, it might be 6, where we see Atticus in Korea and he meets
succubus.
The succubus. Again, we were watching the Terror season 2 a little while ago, which wasn't great in the end, but it had a very much Korean Japanese-esque horror cinema vibe. So there are these kind of boxes around certain episodes, but I totally understand you. The marketing suggested kind of a more Lovecraftian sense of depth to the series, but until you get to 8, which is really kind of the cosmic, off on different dimensions, and then 9, which is just horror.
Episode 7
is the other way around,
where Hippolyta makes her journey.
Oh, 7, okay. That's the cosmic-y one. So there's a couple there, but it takes a while to get there. And it is far more about the era in which they're in and how prevalent that is for now.
Yes. I think a lot of it, too, is we only have 10 episodes, and they're cramming all of this stuff.
Yeah.
So it's what Silver said, right? They have to cover, Hippolyta's journey. That's a book in and of itself, right? Yeah. But that's like a part of one episode, and then that needs to also play with all the magic stuff that's happening with Christina and the order and all that.
Yeah.
And it all somehow needs to be cohesive and make sense together. I think it's almost like impossible to make it all fit. And to me, it didn't. I didn't really see the connection between the cosmic stuff versus, you know, what Christina is doing. And honestly, just in general, all the magic stuff seemed nonsensical to me. Like I couldn't really keep up with what they were saying. You know, like, oh, you need a body intention, and like it's just like mumbo jumbo, sort of.
Right. There's a certain level of techno babble to it.
Yes.
like in the Star Trek episode where the engineer is just babbling off technical terms that don't really make sense, but they have to make sense within the confines of the show.
But you know the problem, Silver, I didn't buy that with only that information. Atticus and the others know what the fuck they're doing. Right. Because I wouldn't.
Yeah, no,
so
I mean,
to me, it just seems like they're flying off the cuff.
That is a potential
and totally
issue.
Out of their depth.
That is a potential issue with the finale that I agree with. Yeah.
I said to Silver when we were watching it that partly at times those elements you're talking about felt like an episode of Buffy.
Yeah,
we've got to get this from this thing and that thing to cross with that thing to get to that thing to go to that place to rescue that. You know what I mean? And it did.
And then
like
someone reads a spell and it's it's done.
And you're like, okay, so they got the Necronomicon, that's there, right. And they've got the spell book and that's there. And then there's this order, and there's the wizards, and then there's Samuel, but Titan was the first one. And then you've got William, and you've got what's the female, Christina? You've got those two who are actually the same person, but kind of weren't at one point. But then, I know what you mean. It's a blink and you miss it series. It really is. Like if you've got your phone out and you're pissing about on Twitter or doing rant, you're going to miss so many little tiny hints of things or plot threads or references to stuff. Just when I was rewatching,
there's no filler in there. Really,
you pick apart these little bits you hadn't seen before. It's so dense.
Mm.
And when Ruby pulls, I've got to mention this is one of my favorite bits. The special effects in this can be hit and miss. I think
it's so rough,
but some of them are amazing.
Yeah, we should probably wait a little until we get to that episode.
Go on.
Because we're still really at the beginning of the show, where they arrive at the mansion after the monster attack, which is again brilliantly made. And the effects in that scene as well, like with the monsters, are really solid. Like also with the gore, really solid. And so they arrive at the Braithwaite Manor where an occult ritual is going to be performed, and sort of Atticus. It turns out that Atticus is actually an ancestor of a huge sort of cult member, a cult leader, who tried to perform a ritual. Yeah, Titus Braithwaite, who tried to perform a ritual to become immortal, and basically gain access to the Garden of Eden, and it backfired horrendously, and only sort of Atticus's great grandmother was able to walk out alive. And because he has Titus's blood in him, Atticus then becomes an intrinsic part of the ritual that's going to be performed, but not in the way that that the cultists had sort of hoped for, because it backfires and basically annihilates all of them, and still keeps Atticus safe, even though the entire house, a manor around him, just crumbles.
Yeah. So was it explained like what went wrong in that ritual? Because it just, I'm not sure I followed exactly what went wrong.
Honestly, I don't remember. I got the sense, that the magic
they got something wrong in the spell or something.
Was a little more powerful. Also, it seemed clear to me that Christina at that point hadn't, because of the way she sort of set up Atticus.
Yes.
Had a finger in it too. That she knew what was going to happen. And it backfires.
And she does say in later episodes that with these things, there are an infinite number of small details that you can do wrong and just die.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Something else to mention about that ritual as well. there's a trope in cinema, in black cinema, called the Black Wizard, and it's often when a character does something magical or enables something, but sacrifices themselves in order to save a white character. It's a trope it's in a lot of it. Stephen King has been criticized for using it quite a lot. The Shining is a very obvious example. And what this scene, the ritual, does is play with that, because just look at it and pull it apart analytically for a second. That scene, a bunch of white people dressed in robes chanting are using black guy to become immortal. Yeah, I mean, but I think the way they handle it and the way they twist it a little bit is quite unique and quite different. We don't see that very often in cinema or TV.
Also worth noting, they're not just any white guys. They're like they're the elite. The
very very elite. Yeah.
Ostensibly, like run the country, like bankers and whatnot.
Yeah,
right.
The hidden elite.
Yeah,
as it were, beyond their white picket fences. The joy of Americana.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's.
So the house collapses, and unfortunately, Atticus's Uncle George is killed.
By the way, I loved Uncle George. He was amazing. He had this charisma about him.
When he died, we were both like, Uncle George
killed the other one.
He was the most likable character on the show.
He was. He's the one who had the heart in the right place, and I like the
heart
actor.
Of gold.
And
yeah. We should also say, like, the acting on the show, just from start to finish, is uniformly excellent. In every single part.
There's like an energy about so Atticus, right? The main dude he's got this vitality.
Yeah,
and
he's
presence.
very intense.
Yeah, he's very intense. He's jacked as well, so he's always like powerful in scenes. And he's got this like
vulnerability to him, even though he's basically this huge muscular guy and really tall and really it can be intimidating. He has this really
he makes this face where he's like
to him.
About to cry sometimes.
Yeah,
which is
he's got like an honor to him. And he distinguishes himself in certain situations, but he also finds a lot of things difficult to understand, including his father, obviously, who we'll get to. That relationship is a very odd, difficult, kind of intense, problematic one.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing that the second episode sort of ends with is he gets his father back, but then he loses his uncle because they do find Montrose at the manor where he was being kept prisoner. But it cost them Uncle George, and then the show sort of moves on to episode 3, where Leticia receives a huge amount of money and uses that to buy a house in a white neighborhood where she is not welcome, which was again something that was very, very real back then. Black people who purchased real estate in white neighborhoods were not greeted in very friendly manner. Some of them were lynched. Some of them were just run off. There was
burnt out, driven out. Yeah.
So I thought that was just like I don't want to say like an imbecile idea, but I don't understand why she would do it. She knew what was likely to happen, and the gain. What's the benefit you get, right? It's almost like you have everything to lose because everybody's gonna hate you in the neighborhood. That's the status quo, and what do you gain from it? Why not just
Well, essentially, it's an act of defiance. It's an act of saying, I don't want to play by your rules. I don't want to play by these. Like this unjust system that you've put into place.
But I think it also shows how she doesn't really look that far ahead in her plans.
It does.
And, like she didn't. I don't think she really understood what she was setting herself up to.
No,
maybe.
I mean you're right. Like Leticia, the character, is not really. She's not thinking long term.
Right.
I think for her,
she had like an impulse.
For her, it was exactly right. It was an impulse for not only this was her chance. Like she says this to her sister Ruby. Like this is her chance to sort of try and make a home where they can sort of reforge the bond that they've lost because Letty kind of hasn't been there and has sort of been freeloading off Ruby for all this time, and so this is kind of. that's why the later scene in that episode where Ruby lashes back out against Letty is so devastating to Letty, because this is sort of her moment of trying to sort of make it right, but really even in that moment it's still about Letty, less than it is about Ruby, because if it had been about Ruby, she would have just sort of given Ruby a portion of the money rather than trying to make
and
this
made her
self-aggrandizing
a part of
act.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and Ruby's an interesting character, I find, because as you said, this kind of club singer who wants a greater station in life, wants to be noticed, wants to be revered for who she could be.
Is hardworking, is smart, like does all the right things, but she still cannot get ahead simply because of the color of her skin.
It's interesting as well.
And her gender,
they pretty much play this ghost as well, don't they? When they walk through the door, they walk through the door. Seems like this could be a haunted house, maybe. And it totally turns into one. But I love the way that's structured, because it is like a very traditional Amityville, tropey, but done in a slightly different way, kind of left field haunted house story. New couple moves into building, starts getting bad vibes, and then you kind of tie the overt racism outside of that house in the neighborhood to that as well. And the themes they play with throughout the episode, I find really, really cool. It was a very, very good episode, that one.
Yeah, I mean, you get that amazing scene at the end where they figured out that the house used to be owned by a member of the same cult that Titus Braithwaite had basically founded, and that he had basically sort of been exiled from it, and was doing his own research where he was basically kidnapping black people off the street and then experimenting on them in his basement. And you see these ghosts of the results of these experiments, like a big, huge guy with a baby for a head, where a baby.
What was the idea on that experiment? Like, what was the expected outcome?
Maybe he didn't watch Beetlejuice and just wanted to recreate that guy in the waiting room.
Oh,
that's interesting as well, because that was actually based on a real surgeon, a guy, I can't remember the name. I think it's Sims, who in that era operated on black women without consent, without any anesthesia, in order to find out how the human body operated and stuff. So a lot of these things that seem fantastical are rooted in very real history.
Yeah, and I mean, there's also echoes of Mengele and his sort of surgeries of twins and experiments with twins as well. In the whole thing. But yeah, I mean, they get that. They eventually try and perform an exorcism in the basement, where basically
always the basement,
where basically Letty does call upon all these spirits that the old spirit that the former owner experimented on and mauled, basically, and they all sort of regenerate from the energy of their communion, as it were, as they basically banish him from existence. And that's a really powerful scene as well, where you actually see them sort of reconstitute themselves and regenerate themselves from what he made them and back into what they were.
I find ghosts really stupid. I have to be honest. Every time I see, how does it work, right? Like, you can go through walls, but the ground is solid for you. You're standing, or you can sit in chairs. So you're not going through chairs, but like walls is fine, right? What's the mechanics in it? I always find it so arbitrary and silly. but that pulls me out, that sort of thing, because when I look at ghosts, I'm like, it doesn't make sense, doesn't connect with anything that makes any sense to me. So those types of stories, I always have difficulty being immersed in it. So the whole episode felt a bit like dragged on.
Yeah, I mean, it's a problem with that type of subgenre of horror film. Always has been. It's very, very difficult to pull it off. Like something like James Wan, who does like Insidious and The Conjuring, for instance. That's more about the style and the pump of the soundtrack and the quick cuts and the weird monsters. Whereas if you just strip it right down, Paranormal Activity is just slamming doors and people getting dragged through hallways. I mean, so I know what you mean.
Yeah.
It can break your immersion quite a lot. And as I said when we started discussing the episode, it is very tropey, this one. So if you're not a fan of haunted house movies, you'd probably, or exorcisms, that kind of thing, it's probably not going to land that well with you, I think. It's quite an isolated episode compared to some of the others.
Yeah. And of course, they do also have that scene where they have the housewarming party, and
Yes.
And it's crashed by the neighborhood, saying hello to to the newcomers on the street.
As you do,
and doing so in a not so friendly manner, where they basically park their cars and put a brick on their horns, which seems to be really counterproductive because they're neighbors. Like,
yeah.
It must be driving
I
them
only
as
really
crazy
thought
as
it was
it's so
Lefty as
funny
well.
you mentioned that. That's
and it's
exactly
driving
what I
the,
thought. Because
the
for
others,
every
yeah.
black person in that house, they're annoying. There are 20 white people who are fucking going nuts because
Yeah.
of that sound.
Yeah.
Totally self-defeating.
But
And the only one
that's
who's even
just
bothered
the
is
amount.
Lefty.
That's just a level of like hatred.
Yeah.
They want to annoy them so badly
Yeah,
that they're willing to put up with anything, right?
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
That's
exactly right.
a level of petty hate that's just
Of course,
ludicrous.
Right.
From there, it moves on to the fourth episode, which is the Ruby focused
But
one.
hold on, because you skipped when Atticus and Letty get together for the first time, right? Isn't it during
True.
that party?
That is in the housewarming party.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we find out that she's also a virgin, which
Well, that
she
no,
had
that,
the
that,
opposite.
that is in the next episode. Yeah.
Oh, was it?
Yeah.
Sorry, I jumped ahead. Go on.
No,
You
no,
spoiled
that's
it by
fine.
2.5 minutes. How dare you?
But yeah, they've had chemistry since the first moment
Yes.
they meet each other. It's pretty clear that there's a
And
connection between Atticus and
she
Letty.
has an illusion, right? Doesn't she see a hallucination from Atticus where he has like a snake penis? Basically,
Yes.
She does
in the house.
in the
Yeah.
first episode. Yeah.
Yeah,
Which is
yeah.
the same
No,
as
the
the
second
painting in the
episode
house,
is, yeah.
which is there's a painting in the house which is Adam and Eve,
Yeah.
and Eve's penis is a snake.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very hardcore Satan biblical references. going on.
Traumatic. Yeah.
Yeah. And yet she still goes through it in
Yeah,
in
she
episode
does,
3.
yeah.
Yeah.
She was into it.
But yeah, they get together during the housewarming, and he stays. He chooses to stay in the house. Like he had basically planned to move on because Uncle George is dead. He doesn't have a connection to his father Montrose, so there's nothing keeping him there anymore. But then Letty buys the house, and he decides to stay there to sort of try and help protect her against the reaction of the neighborhood. Like he even shows up to the housewarming party wearing his uniform from Korea. So
he
sort of
thinks it'll help.
to show off that he's a veteran. Yeah. But of course, it doesn't really help all that much. But yeah, they conclude the episode by banishing the guy, and it turns out that and there are also like 3 other guys from the neighborhood who break into the mansion as they are performing the exorcism ritual in the basement, where with the intent they break into the house with the intent of presumably killing or hurting Letty and whoever else is in there. And of
And
course,
they get the karma. They
the
get the
house
karma action.
kills them.
Oh, yeah.
And as the episode concludes, we see that basically they've been stuffed in the basement by the house itself, along with
And
a
I
lot
think
of
that's the first.
other corpses.
Yeah, and isn't that at that point we see the planet replica thing? What's the name of that thing?
The orrery.
orrery. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
a very difficult word. I had to look it up.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but when you see it, you immediately know there's something up with that.
Yeah,
right?
that
Because
orrery
it's
is
clearly
that orrery is very Lovecraftian. Yeah.
yes, it's clearly like a special.
Well, it's very ornate and
And
elaborate.
of course,
Right.
Ruby is the
well
one who finds it.
constructed.
No, not Ruby. Sorry, Hippolyta finds it,
Lighter.
Hippolyta.
and then she sort of makes off with it. Though we don't really see her making off with it until episode 6, or 7. Where we
Right.
learn that she's taken it. We only learn that it's missing afterwards. But yeah, they move on to the next episode, which is the Ruby-centered one, which is where she encounters William, and
What a
William's sort of-
weird episode.
William makes her the offer of her dreams, which is I can make you a white woman. I can give you all those things that you've dreamed about. But why? Giving you the gift of letting people see you the way they want to see you.
Was there any reason, do you think, he chose Ruby? Like, did he actually just like Ruby for some reason? Or I guess Christina?
I mean, that is the question. Are Christina's feelings for Ruby genuine? Like, is there a crush there? Or
because
is
Christina was already...
Or is Ruby just Christina's sort of way in the door toward Letty and
right? Because
Atticus
since that first encounter, it's already Christina in William's body, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, it's Christina in William's body the moment they meet him on the road. That's also Christina in episode 1.
Like the very start already?
Yeah.
That's still Christina.
So William's body has been there the whole time. She's been dressing up as him.
Just for I thought there was somewhere there in the middle where they
no, it's always
died.
Christina. Yeah.
Okay.
Although, I mean, it is worth pointing out that there does seem to be a marked difference between William and Christina. They don't seem to be, even though it is Christina shifting into William, William still seems to kind of retain part of what was the old William, as it were. So they do kind of seem to be two different people.
They have a touch of duality,
one person, as it were.
Yeah, in the same way that Ruby is a bit different when she is, in white form, let's say.
Yeah.
This episode to me felt like the most Jordan Peele, if that makes sense.
Right.
Get Out, Us, the stuff he's produced lately. Not the Keel and Peele stuff, but the modern horror stuff.
He was the guy that did Get Out?
Yes, yeah.
Oh, I watched that recently. Yeah, it was excellent.
Just the way that the episode is shot. There's a lot of very lingering shots. So there's a lot of beautiful set design. And obviously when Ruby is given the power by Christina William to become the white version of herself, it gives her both this freedom that she's never had before to walk through society, to walk through a room and not be stared at, but it also takes part of her away. And that's this dichotomy within this episode. She gets that job and she settles into this kind of routine, but then the physical manifestation of ripping her own flesh off to become herself again.
It's so brutal.
Yeah.
It's an amazing effect, mate. Like I said, most of the stuff in this is good. There's a few hit and miss bits here CGI wise, but that effect, it's back like American. It's back like the Howling in American Werewolf. The real body horror, but they do it so beautifully. It looks amazing. It's like a Cronenberg moment.
Yeah, it's I think Ruby, the actress, plays it really well because you can really, you can tell that every small thing is just like walking in the park as a white woman. Obviously it's not the actress doing it, but when she talks about it after, right, as back in her own skin, and she talks about it, you can feel the guilt that she enjoyed it that much.
Yeah.
Right. So talking about it
because she now has a privilege that the other her peers do not, as it were.
Yeah, and it doesn't feel right to have that, but at the same time, she's yearned it, or yearned for it all of her life, right?
Yeah.
So it's like that, like conflict in her. I think it's really well done.
I think also if you look at the way her character develops throughout the next few episodes, she takes that power she's been given, this ability to flip to the white, more supremacist, more freeing race of the era, and she pushes it more and more. Like she'll go into situations where her skin is just about to come off because the liquor is wearing off, or she'll be in situations where she's about to change, or she'll just do it in front of people. That the moment
she really needs to manage that better. Like, get a timer or something and drink it before. I mean, come on.
I mean, there's
like Jacqueline Hyde.
She also learns that it isn't quite what she sort of thought it would be when she, like, there's that scene where she's during their break when all the sort of the department store women sort of meet and gossip. and she like she doesn't fit into that crowd, even though she has the skin color. She's still Ruby inside.
Yeah.
Yeah. And she's also trying to help that the black intern who hasn't been there very long. And
yeah, I
even
mean,
when she's speaking to her,
and
difficult
that
conversations.
relationship also is really interesting because at first, like, she has intense jealousy toward her because she
got that job.
You can sort
she
of
wanted.
you can sort of get not only did she get the job, but then sort of Ruby asks her, oh, you're really must be really well educated and stuff. Nah, like.
No, she finds out she's not educated.
Yeah. Like, she's only been hired because of her appeal.
She's not trying
looks.
half as hard as Ruby does on anything. She's not really putting in the effort either.
Yeah.
So she almost gets angry at that point. Like, you've been given this chance that I've, in some ways, she's longed for her whole life, and she's doing a poor job at it, basically.
Yeah, and then of course, she learns that the department store owner is not quite the upstanding family man that the other department store women assert he is. He gets a little fresh with the intern or what, like the new hire, and tries to basically molest and sexually assault her. Not only tries, he does sexually assault her in an alleyway while Ruby watches. And then Ruby pays him back in kind and basically rapes him with a shoe.
Yep.
Yes.
And that is not a sentence that most people say on an average day.
And that is literal, by the way. If people are like, did I miss that? No, because that's... I never saw that coming. Because I knew she was gonna, like, punish him, for sure.
Yeah.
But when she's like taking the shoe, and really, it took me a second to process. Like, is she doing? Yes. Okay. She's doing that. All right.
Well, it's a metaphor reversal. So it's the idea of licking someone's shoes, licking someone's boots because you defer to them because you're inferior. So taking that person's boots and putting it up their own arse is a lovely metaphorical reversal of that.
And she times the transformation perfectly.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Yeah. Just at the end to reveal, and then strolls out, and the chunks of flesh kind of dripping off her bit by bit. It's
so messy, dude.
So cool. Honestly,
poor janitors.
The janitors.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, the mess she leaves in the elevator too, like early in the episode. Yeah.
The janitor would be like, "Come on, man, what the fuck happened here?
I get paid enough for this. I don't clean up human."
Yeah. And then there's episode 5, which is where they basically try and do some investigating. Atticus, Letty, and Montrose. Montrose tries to discourage Letty and Atticus from doing it, as they track down the museum and try to find the sort of hidden headquarters of the guy who used to own the mansion Letty bought, Hiram. Hiram Epstein, I think it is.
Yeah.
And they try and locate it, like his vault, and they eventually find it. And they find out why Hiram only had one arm, because his arm got locked in the vault, because the vault requires the blood of Titus Braithwaite to open, and he had basically tried to put his arm in, and he didn't have the blood of Titus Braithwaite, so he basically kept his arm, so he had to cut it off to get out. Like a bear trap.
Not quite, but a bit like Flash Gordon when Timothy Dalton puts his arm in the tree.
But they eventually find Hiram's sort of underground lair, where they make another discovery with an undead who basically rises as they come in. She's presumably been sort of imprisoned there by magic, by Hiram's magic, and she has his pages of the original sort of magical book that they need to perform these magical rituals. And I mean that was in a way that episode is the most Lovecraftian of them. I feel like that's the one that got the trailer for Comic-Con and whatnot, when they sort of descend into the lair underneath the museum and whatnot. And there's the scene
it's
from
kind of
out
like a
Indiana
national treasure.
Indiana Jones and the
Indiana
Last
Jones.
Crusade. With the sort
very,
of
very
penitent path, with the
Yes.
invisible path across the chasm.
Very
Yeah.
much so.
Like I think in some ways it's probably the weakest episode, or one. No, I wouldn't say it's the weakest. It's one of the weakest, because the weakest episode I think is coming later. But
Yeah, I do.
I
But
did like the Indiana Jones vibe, to be honest.
I mean, it's fun.
absolutely.
There is a fun adventure element to it, but compared
Yes,
to sort of,
yeah.
it has next to none of the tension of the other episodes,
That's true.
and like the societal critique that's inherent in most of the other episodes is basically completely gone in
Yeah.
episode 5.
Yeah, it's more of a mystery episode with less.
I mean, it's not completely gone, because
related.
when they reach the undead, who is basically a hermaphrodite native girl, like a Pacific Islander, who's been captured by I think, I don't remember if it was Titus. I think it may have been Titus. Yeah, I think it was Titus who captured her when he sort of was sailing around the Pacific to sort of gather magical relics and whatnot. And came upon her tribe and picked her up. Like, there is that element of sort of imperialism and colonialism and that critique, but it's kind of shallow and flimsy a little bit compared to the critique of the rest of the show.
It's more an aside than it is anything particularly focused on. Whereas the other episodes always have flashpoints that particularly focus. Even the use of music, etc., it's not quite as relevant as it has been in prior episodes or subsequent episodes. I don't think.
And then, of course, they escape. They bring the Islander with them, and they manage to make their way out of the lair with Titus's pages, and or with the pages, and then the worst moment in the show happens, which is when Montrose kills the Islander, because he does it. It doesn't really serve a purpose, because the show already illustrates that Montrose does this in order to kind of try and protect Atticus and Letty. But he already does this by burning the pages that he gets, that they find. And so the act of killing the Islander is basically superfluous. It doesn't really serve a narrative purpose, and it just feels extremely gratuitous and unnecessary and ugly. Especially for a show that sort of tries to bring up social justice and these sort of this critique of oppressive systems, and it just seems to be an unnecessary oppression of another extremely vulnerable minority.
I agree with you, but at the same time, it shows how flawed he is as a man, and how like everything he tries to do is not only misguided, but it's like not a good solution.
I would agree with you, except it's never really brought up again. I mean, it doesn't seem to be something that weighs on his conscience afterward.
No, but it's kind of a theme with him that his solutions to problems are usually like pretty poor. It kind of feels like he,
Yeah, but I mean, there is pretty poor, and then there's just abject horror, which is what he basically does, especially in the light of the fact that
he actually killed someone.
And then he doesn't really sort of process the fact that he actually killed another person later on. It's never really addressed mentioned, or talked about or mentioned ever again. There is that moment in the subsequent episode when Atticus basically tells Letty, no, he killed her, and she looks with horror. She gets a look of horror, but that's the only moment in the entire show after that we get any sort of acknowledgement of what happened there.
That's true.
And I think the show does sort of drop the ball in that moment.
I think that's one criticism we can make of the show. There are moments when there are characterizations that are out of character and don't suit the character particularly at times. And there are also moments where you have actions a character performs which either seem superfluous or seem rushed and therefore isn't given any narrative depth. Not very few and far between. We're talking about a very quality series for the most part. But I do think there are these little moments that plot-wise are just strings that left dangling and are never really stitched up as well as they could be, or they're rushed too quickly. And that's
I hadn't thought too much about that, but he doesn't seem like the kind of guy who would just murder someone. Or if he did, he would be like tormented by it.
I think it would make more sense later, Johnny, because later on we go through who he really is, the stuff he's hiding in his life. His own sexuality, his wife, Atticus, all the issues that have gone on.
It's also, his boyfriend. I mean, it's also a question of, not every murder is equivalent, right? I mean, Montrose would not hesitate to kill like the White Sheriff or whatever to protect his family.
Yeah,
right.
But this is not the person he murders here is
vulnerable, as you
vulnerable
say,
and defenseless.
Innocent.
Yeah, exactly.
I think later on would have made more sense for his character simply because then we would have seen more of who he was, what he was dealing with, and how that anger is emitted. Whereas in that episode, it just seems forced for some reason.
Yeah. But then we move on to episode 6, which is the one in Korea, where we see Atticus. It's a flashback to Atticus's service in Korea, and to basically told from the perspective of the woman he meets there, Jia, who is basically a Korean fox demon.
Right.
Who was summoned.
She has very furry tentacles.
She has 9 tails.
Yes.
Yeah, that are basically tentacles. And she was summoned by the mother of a girl who was being molested by the mother's husband, to sort of save the girl from the husband. And so she possessed the girl and then killed the husband. Well, either she possessed the girl or she took a manifestation that is exactly like the girl. We don't entirely know. That's not really spelled out. That's ambiguous. It doesn't really matter. But she looks the spitting image of the mother's daughter, which is, that is also an interesting relationship between mother and daughter in that way, because it isn't really her daughter anymore. It is this demon. That
right, but there's the promise that if she gets 100 human souls,
there's the potential that's what the mother keeps telling herself, that as soon as you get the 100 souls, everything will go back to normal. I get my daughter back. But whether that's true or not is
more and more
knows.
It seems like unlikely.
That's just basically a delusion that the mother keeps telling herself for comfort, because she needs that comfort. She needs to believe that I can get my daughter back. I can get my daughter back.
I can have my mortal daughter who will live, as she should live, as she would have lived. But of course, she's definitely not that. This for me is my weakest episode, and that's because I love the creature design. That's
really?
One of the
because
first
at the time you said that was the best episode yet when we watched it together.
I remember saying it was very much like the Terror series too, and I just felt too much like that. It's a very dour episode. I like the creature design. I like the way the demon appears with the men. Obviously, the set design and everything else, production design is fantastic. And I like the way that Atticus is the one who kind of breaks not the curse as such, but the want or need for her to fulfill her mother's wish of making 100 souls to become mortal and all this stuff, and kind of shift direction. But I
don't think Atticus is the one who breaks it, because the one who really sort of breaks it is
carry it on kind of thing.
No, because that person is really the other nurse that she becomes friends with. Because she already makes the determination before she ever meets Atticus that she's not going to give her mother the 100th victim.
Yeah.
And of course, then that nurse gets murdered by Atticus, basically. I don't think that she gets dragged away by Atticus and his fellow American soldiers after Atticus shoots another nurse right in front of them.
Yeah, point blank.
Yeah, and executes her. And then she later on sees Atticus, and Atticus becomes sort of the manifestation of all the people who killed her friend, and sort of the vessel for all that resentment and hatred. And she decides that, no, mother, I am going to give you the 100th victim, and it's going to be Atticus. But then, of course, she gets to know Atticus, and they form a relationship and a bond, and she finds that she's no longer able to make him the 100th victim.
And when she tries, he freaks right out. And of course you would, wouldn't you? I mean, you know, in the middle of sex.
She was gonna do it, right? She was gonna eat him, but he gets away, basically, right? He escapes.
No. The scene is kind of more like,
yeah, it's ambiguous.
She's trying to back off. She's trying to make her tendrils stay away and just have kind of sex, but she realizes she's not gonna be able to stop.
She actually says something like she can keep the tails under control. Yeah. But
by this time he's gone. He just loses it and just runs out of the room. Leave me alone. Leave me alone.
Wouldn't you if you saw 5-meter furry tails coming out of her holes?
And not only that, but like on your eye sockets,
Jonny.
like
come on,
they stitch right into your eye sockets and whatnot. Yeah.
Oh yeah, Jesus.
But yeah,
why do they have to be furry? Why is that?
Well, because she's a fox. Yeah, like she's a fox demon. They're foxtails.
Okay, I didn't catch that part. They look more like Dead Space. Like the tendrils that come off the little creatures that follow you around. A little bit like that.
Awful.
But yeah, I mean they are ostensibly more tentacles than tails, but yeah, in mythology they are 9-tailed foxes.
Yeah. Foxy succubi.
But yeah, I mean Atticus, they do fall in love, Gia and Atticus, and it's a relationship that I think is pretty well realized in the show. I don't quite agree with you that it had the feeling of the Terror season 2. Like I felt there was much better pacing, also because it's just one episode.
Definitely.
And we are consistently interested in Gia and her conflict between like getting the 100 victims, her mother, and the relationships that she has, and the desire for vengeance for her sort of dead nurse friend. And I think that's all the show managed to relay all that in a compelling way. But then we move on to episode 7, which is the journey of Hippolyta, where we learn that she's stolen the orrery from the mansion that Letty bought, that Hiram Epstein owned, and she figures out the puzzle in the orrery, which takes her to this distant observatory.
How is she suddenly like a math genius?
I don't think that was
she
sudden.
Fixes.
I mean that. No, but
she fixes the time machine, and she knows stuff.
Yeah, I mean
even before her travels.
Yes, she does, but I think that was kind of established already in the pilot episode where she gets into the argument with George, and he basically says, "No, I'm the one who's going on the trip, and like you're not going, you're staying behind," which is also...
But was she established as like super smart at that point? Because it looks like legit.
Yeah, I think
like,
was
beautiful
established
mind stuff.
That her father was an academic, and that
okay. I really didn't catch that. So when I saw, like, beautiful mind status, time machine, right? Planets.
Right.
What?
Oh, it goes cosmic quick. Like, this is the one I said to Silver. Now we're in full-on Lovecraft territory. Because this is the one where... I know what you mean, though. It's not set up amazingly well. And I always had the thought that if you're manipulating time and dimensions, then perhaps you could put it down to the fact that she's learned this in the future, gone back to the past, and cyclically, she just has this immense knowledge of the universe and things like that now as well. I love the effects, the blues and the purples.
It was her father. Like she learned it from. That was my impression anyway.
Okay.
But yeah, it's one of those episodes that when she's floating in space, trying to decide things and speaking to this weird alien, and it's almost like an entirely separate show for about 40 minutes. It feels so separate.
Yeah, I mean
so different.
The episode where she actually meets Josephine Baker, like, got me jumping out of my chair. Like,
We don't
see a lot of representations of her in modern media, unfortunately, and she's really one of the most remarkable people of the 20th century that more people should know about.
It's basically Lovecraft Country's equivalent to an episode of Quantum Leap. That's what this episode is, but with way bigger production values and shininess. You know, it kind of does the same thing, but to watch her move through these important historical figures and to see the importance that it has on the impact for her, and then
the self-realization of becoming Hippolyta as she wanted to be,
and embracing that.
My biggest problem I have is it's so crammed and it all happens so quickly that you don't really get the sense that all of those travels have a big impact on her. Like clearly she's, you know, she's like learned more and stuff. She comes out really smart and knows more stuff, but each of those travels is like almost a lifetime where she spends, you know, decades in those places doing stuff. I didn't really get the sense that, you know, it impacted, like she seemed a fairly similar person overall on the other end of it, besides just like knowing more stuff. And you would imagine only one of those would change you like 1000%.
I mean, she
just the way you talk and
she seemed.
I think that's one of the problems of the TV series in condensing these things down so much to make stuff concise for us. It feels like a film, Jonny. You know, when you take something elaborate, you have to pack it into the middle of a film because you haven't got time to expand on it.
Right.
I think this is a series that could have done with 14 episodes or 2 seasons. You know, to really expand.
Well, definitely could have done with 2 seasons. Yeah.
Absolutely, because some of these episodes, as you said, that you know they've got 3 episodes in them, and this is one of them. Because every there could have been an episode for each of the time periods. You could have done 2 or 3 full episodes
a spin-off
just in there
for
Hippolyta. miniseries, like that Battlestar Galactica spin-off. Do a couple of them or something, but it would have worked because I think then you get more of a sense of the universe that she's inhabiting, rather than this quick kind of snap Hollywood-esque let's move through time periods and make her better.
I mean, I think she did change more so. I mean, she changes physically in that her hair turns blue into the character that her daughter Diana draws in the comic books that she draws. But I think like before that episode, she's kind of meek in that she doesn't really act out. Like she has, even when like she lets George go instead of her, even though she wants to be the one who goes and does the travel journal for a bit. She lets George go initially, and when they come back and they tell her that George is dead, she knows the story they're selling her isn't the story, but she still like sort of demurs to it and still kind of accepts it until the moment she doesn't and goes to the estate and then to the observatory in that episode. And I think after that, in the subsequent episodes, she's completely comfortable in her own skin, and she's the one who sort of sees all the angles and
and she takes it upon herself to get shit done. Whatever it is, right?
Oh yeah, like, she's the leader, isn't she? Almost
fix
at that
the
point.
kid, fix the timeline, whatever.
Yeah. And she's right on it. There's no messing about either. She's just bang. You know, I think the blue her turns her into a uber cosmic scientist from that moment forward. She fulfills her skin and becomes, you know.
Really, one of my favorite scenes in the show is probably the scene that she gets with George, where she says, after she basically states herself as being George's wife, and she wakes up in bed with him.
In the bedroom,
and she tells him all the things that bothered him about their relationship, but were never spoken. Like, that he actually held her back, but she was never sort of... She tried to tell him, but there was never a way to tell him and to get him to listen and so forth. And I think that the honesty and just reality of that scene is really, really compelling. And it's something that sort of rings true, I think, for a lot of people's relationships. And
we should just say as well that at this point we know by now that Atticus could be either George's or Montrose's son.
That is clear even by the end of episode 2 when George dies, because George basically talks to Montrose about it in the car as he's dying. That Atticus is potentially his child. But from there we move on to I mean, I may be a little too quick to move on, because there's also that scene where of course where Hippolyta becomes gladiatorial fighter almost.
Leads the line.
Uh-huh.
And
A bit Wonder Woman-esque-ish.
and gets to go into war with like an army of like faceless Confederate soldiers that are basically just a manifestation for her to take out all her rage and her sort of the impotence that white oppressive society has basically put her under, and just take it out on it in a way that's really sort of must be really viscerally satisfying for a lot of people, I imagine.
Yeah, and it's a bit of a payoff for her.
And
know,
it's,
and for the
it's
audience,
basically a
for the
fantasy made reality.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. It's a really nice
power
scene,
fantasy, and that is in a lot of ways that is exactly what this show is. It's a power fantasy for a community that's been really, really, really that hasn't had a lot of power.
True.
No.
It's taken over, like magic eventually, and ultimately, which has been a purview. Well, it has been a white person
privilege, as it were,
until then, and they take it entirely from them in the end. Which we'll touch on it, but I think it goes the other way and it gets a bit silly. But we'll get to that in the end.
Oh yeah, Rise of Skywalker is coming. Don't worry.
But yeah, we move on to episode 8, which is.
By the way, just real quick before you move on, I think we later learned that at that time when she does the traveling, Atticus also travels to the future. Isn't at that same time? Yeah.
No, we don't learn it that episode. We learn
about it later.
We just see the episode jump. We just see Atticus jumping out of the portal at the end of the episode, and then holding the Lovecraft Country book in his hand.
Yes.
And then making his getaway from the observatory as we hear police sirens.
Yeah.
And then there's episode 8, which is
horror, baby.
Yeah, exactly. When Hippolyta, of course, having now disappeared into the space-time continuum, has left her daughter Diana behind, with no recourse, and of course, accidentally Hippolyta left behind her daughter's comic book for her at the observatory, which the police then find and use to track down Diana and confront Diana, and then the malicious sheriff puts a curse on Diana.
Spits on her face.
Yeah, and does a lot more than that as he casts a curse on her, and then basically just walks away. And Diana then spends the rest of the episode hunted by 2 really, really creepy versions of Uncle Tom characters.
Their design is hilarious.
I kept wondering, are the twins just really bad at chasing, or are they not really wanting to catch Dee? Because it just seems like they're kind of hanging around, not really trying to catch her, just like being funny and spooky.
I mean, for me, it seemed like it was. I guess you could kind of call it an allegory for time. It was just because it was inevitable that they would catch up, so they didn't need to rush.
Almost like the slow-moving killer in a movie.
Yeah, I mean, there was no
right.
I mean, what would happen when Dee would have to go to sleep?
Yes, at some point the victim is gonna slip, or whatever it is, and the killer is gonna catch up. And...
Yeah,
it's a Freddy Krueger thing.
Yeah.
It's odd because I don't know why it popped in my head, but basically, if you think of this as a game mechanic, it's basically Mario and the big boost.
Yes.
Just turn away. Oh, it'll be fine. Oh crap. Oh, it'll be fine. It's just that. I like the design, and I like some of their
Resident Evil 2, when you have Big Daddy chasing you around very slowly. He's not really gonna catch you, but he's kind of always there, and like
it'll be okay.
If you fuck up, then he'll get you.
But no, I like their design. I like the sharpened teeth. I like the awkward movements. I think there's a bit too much of them shown at times. I always like to pull back on those things to make them a bit more menacing. But I like the episode. I like the way they operate, and the way Dee handles it and the fear that's instilled in her until she starts confronting it.
I think the way they show them is effective because they're rarely the focus of the shot. Like,
Yeah,
they're
it's
usually
always
they're usually always like in the
somewhere else.
background or
Yeah,
in the periphery.
there are a few
or-
times when I hadn't noticed they were there,
Right.
and suddenly, whoa, okay,
Yeah, they're like that.
uh-huh.
Yeah, and I
But
mean,
it's kind
and I
of
mean, you have
scary.
to. You also have to give it to those child
Mm.
actors because they did an amazing job with
Yeah.
with the movements and whatnot.
Yeah,
Like, making it
yeah.
creepy.
It looked creepy, and you know, you get that sense of menace, and you know, that like the Slender Man, the Tall Man, you know, many different versions of the same type of thing, of someone stalking you in the background and ever present. It follows is kind of similar as well.
Of course,
as a premise.
D tries to sort of entreat the others for help, but they won't hear of it, and that was another moment that didn't quite sit right with me. The moment D runs into Letty outside the mansion, and Letty just sort of dismisses her. No, like go inside. Like that felt a little unlike Letty, because it's pretty clear that there's something that's really terrifying D, and Letty's
She's
just
just
completely
so
dismissive of her.
absorbed into whatever she's looking into that
Yeah.
she doesn't even
Yeah,
notice.
and it felt a little out of character to me, to what my perception of Letty was at that time, that moment.
Yeah, I think that it leans more towards the, you know, Christina and the stuff that's going on with that, and she is so absorbed by that and by Atticus
Right.
and what's going on that she just completely ignores Dee. But it does seem out of character given how we built that character up so far. I think that, again, like I said before, I think that's one of the very few.
And especially as we also learn that by that point we've learned that that Letty is pregnant with Atticus's child.
Yeah.
From when
Right.
they got together during the housewarming party. It only takes one time, folks.
It does. I was gonna.
Be
I
careful out
didn't want to go there, but wear your condoms. You know, do what you gotta do. Unless you want the thing to happen, but
Especially this could be a Lovecraftian child. You don't know what that means.
That's true.
Tentacles. I mean, whoa.
a lot of weird shit going on at the time in the house. You don't really want to
Yeah.
Much
take your
weird shit, man.
chances there.
But yeah, the episode ends with Dee basically channeling her mother and attempting to confront the darkness that's pursuing her. She does this first when she confronts the sheriff. Basically goes right to him, spits on his shirt, spits back at him, and then turns and leaves. And then she tries to confront the two entities pursuing her, and Montrose finds her fighting what looks to be nothing, and grabs her, and of course the entities get her and cut into her arm. And
Yeah, and visually she almost becomes strikingly like that.
Yeah. And her, like in the subsequent episode, we see her arm basically rotting away, kind of.
Pretty raisin like.
Yeah, as the subsequent episode 9, then deals with sort of the fallout from that. As
Yeah, too much time in the bathtub.
Yeah, like 4.5 days.
Yeah.
As they try and deal with the fallout of the falling victim to this. And of course Hippolyta taking charge and deciding that no, well, we have to go back in time to find that that magic book that has some kind of spell that we can use to sort of break this curse on her. And so they go back to Tulsa, Oklahoma, in at a rather fateful time that has scarred Montrose.
Yeah, very much.
And definitely affected the course of his life. And they then witnessed the race riots of Tulsa, Oklahoma, which were a rather abhorrent event that not many people know about.
I didn't know about it either. I had to look it up after. See, it was a real thing.
Yeah,
I was the same. I hadn't heard about it until Silver told me when we actually watched it.
Also real, unfortunately. Like I first read about it, I think like 6 or 7 years ago. So it's not really it hasn't really been a thing that's been a part of the public consciousness of history, like a lot of other things in
an ugly chapter
in,
kind of.
when it comes to ugly history that people would rather like to forget.
Before we
rather
get
than
into that, I
remember.
just want to mention a few things about Montrose that we haven't discussed from the prior episode, and that is essentially he's gay. He's been
Oh
hiding.
yeah, we haven't covered that.
He's been hiding the fact
all
he's
of
gay
the
for a long time.
guilt and
Yeah. He's got a boyfriend.
shame.
He's also a drag queen.
Yeah.
Who have a very tumultuous relationship because he has so much angry guilt. He pushes this person away constantly, despite them trying to do the best for him. And to
Also,
accept
once
him.
again, wear your condoms, my dude. I'm just saying, you know. What-
Public service announcement.
See, I think
it applies to them as well.
I think the fact that you that we all kind of forgot to talk about that particular sort of plot thread is telling to how kind of irrelevant it really was. Ultimately,
It doesn't really have much bearing on the character apart from the identity of the guilt that he has.
Exactly. It does explain
it-
a lot
it
about how he
explains-
turned out.
It
Like
explains
in terms of
it explains
anger,
a couple
guilt.
of things, certainly, yeah. But I mean, I think I really do enjoy. Really did enjoy the scene he gets with his boyfriend at the club.
The cabaret kind of thing is
at the
good.
cabaret, yes.
Yeah.
But that scene is entirely tainted by the fact that the episode prior he cold-bloodedly murdered the Islander.
Yes, the disconnect.
Yeah.
He's celebrating on that. Is that like what, a few days after he killed
Yes.
someone?
Yeah, basically.
Yeah.
I think it's very I think the good thing about
Because,
that scene
I mean,
is the way the character changes
because
throughout.
that scene is basically him achieving self-realization and finally accepting the fact that he's homosexual. And
Well, yes
accepting
and no, because still,
his
even
place within the
after,
community.
he's still like plagued with, you know, shame and
Yeah, but that's because
guilt and all.
I mean, I don't think that's not shame and guilt for himself so much as it is how others will perceive him, especially Atticus.
Yeah, I think
Right,
that
but
whole
if
scene
you-
is
I think that if-
catharsis, isn't it?
Mm.
Really, but also then the self-loathing that comes with
Yeah.
not being able to find the catharsis.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fair. I think he's on the road to accepting himself, but my view is that if you do accept yourself, then, you know, it doesn't really matter to you if other people think, you know, something different of you because you're at peace with yourself, right? I don't think he's
right.
there.
I mean,
I think he's
no.
taking steps,
Yeah.
and the party scene is a beautiful one. But clearly, his fears are well founded because when Atticus finds out, he explodes. Right? Atticus is like outraged.
Yeah.
What? You're gay? And all my life, you've hit me because I was like not being manly enough or something, or like not being strong.
Yeah.
And of course, it comes from that place of Montrose not wanting Atticus to be like him.
Yeah.
And not have to go through what he goes.
Yeah, and that self-loathing has fed into his whole identity, and therefore how he becomes a father and how he, you know, deals with his children as well.
Yeah.
You know, and there's this whole series, this whole show is about dichotomies all the way through everything.
Yeah, especially between parents and children, because you have Montrose and his father, and then you have Montrose and Atticus, and then you have Letty and Ruby and their mother, and then you have Christina and her father. And all these sort of really, really tainted and kind of broken father-daughter relationships. And even the one that seems the healthiest at the start, which is the one between Hippolyta and Diana, kind of goes south when Hippolyta basically leaves Diana to sort of go on her own adventure for 200 years.
Yeah.
And basically abandons her daughter.
Honestly, I would forgive if she was my mother, I'd be like, 100%. Go do those things, right? And then come back. It's fine. I think I would understand because it's the universe. It's like an incredible...
I mean, if you're like a 10, 11-year-old girl and your mother leaves you to be ravaged by a demon, like...
You're asking your mother to... Can't she take a few months to go explore the universe?
Cosmic sabbatical.
Imagine the audacity of the child to deny that.
I mean,
But
there's also the question of who
the
she,
child, the
who
universe
she gets left with, right? Yeah.
No, I know. As a kid, it would seem like she left you, right? But of course, and Hippolyta was conflicted by it for sure.
Tell you that there's a very telling moment as well. As we getting back to where you were talking about the episode when they're doing the time travel stuff, when Montrose and Atticus and Leticia stood watching Montrose's father on the porch. I think he's about to go to the prom, and the young kids are there. You know, the older generation as they were, and Atticus at that moment truly understands just how brutal Montrose's father was to him, and how therefore that's kind of dribbled down, let alone the homosexual kind of outlet and having that hidden and becoming angry because of that, but also just the way his father treated him, and how these relationships trickle down through the eras and through the different parts of the family.
Yeah,
and the different treatment towards George,
massive
versus Montrose. It was. And some of it may be just because Montrose, misbehaved or something, but it was like, good son versus bad son. Like,
like the playing favorites.
pretty brutal.
Pretty ugly stuff.
And then I love the whole time travel bit. The fact that they're watching the riots are taking place, and when he's watching, and they suddenly realize that this thing that's been bothering Montrose for ages, this memory of him, when he was a kid. A teenager, realizing he was gay, he knew he was, but it wasn't the right thing in society, and he's holding this other gay kid's hand, and he's set upon by a group of people who just basically want to beat the shit out of him because he's black and he's gay, and who comes to the savior? Well, it's Atticus. It's just that they didn't know it at the time.
The mysterious stranger. It reminded me of Fallout.
Yeah,
with the mysterious stranger.
Happens to have a baseball bat just in front of him there he can pick up and go over with.
Yeah.
But he's the one who comes and fulfills this cyclical memory again, which I think is beautifully
one
done.
of the classic time travel mindfucks where
switcheroo.
So it was him, which means if he hadn't traveled, he wouldn't have been there. But then what does that mean for the continuity of things?
Yeah, it's the cyclical that it's already locked in. You can't change it.
It's already locked in some way.
And it doesn't, but does make sense. The fact that
but here's a philosophical, just a very small tangent. Atticus, do you guys think that Atticus had a choice to just stay away and let whatever happen?
No.
Or did he have no choice but to go there and be the fateful, mysterious stranger that does, protect?
No, I don't think within the context of the show, I don't think there was a choice
within this context. I think the way it works narratively,
as it were.
Yeah.
Or destiny, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. All fates tied together, and I think that's the whole point of making it tied together in this way. The fact that he saves himself from not being born. That's essentially what it is. Because if he, if the father had been killed or not been killed even, but then not gone on to marry his mother and all these things. So it's just a nice, neat way of throwing time travel in and kind of wrapping that little string up.
And also why he has to stop Montrose from stepping in and saving his would-be lover at the time.
Right.
Who gets murdered in front of him.
Yeah. And I think this is where we start creeping towards the end of the show, and you start seeing too many things rushed and tied together.
You also get sort of the correspond, or at the same time as this, you get Letty in the household of the woman who would become Atticus's mother, trying to track down the book, and then running into basically I think it's Hannah's daughter, either Hannah's daughter or Hannah's granddaughter.
Yeah, like Atticus's grandmother or something.
Yeah, like grandmother or great grandmother. And she basically chooses to hand the book over to Letty, even though she knows that they're all dead, and basically accepts that death so that the future generation, the generation of her grandchild inside Letty, can live and can have a future, and can take power away from the whites and give it back to. And
Here's my
give
thing.
it to the blacks.
The house is burning down. Can't they just exit the house?
No, because that would be a sensible, logical, normal thing to do. And these people aren't doing logical things.
The house is ostensibly surrounded. Every
Okay.
entrance is covered. I mean, there are people all around the house. There was a complete pogrom. Like it's a mob outside the house, throwing Molotov cocktails inside the windows and shooting through the windows and whatnot. So they can't just walk outside. No.
Oh, and we should mention as well, just because this is this kind of show where you just go,
Of course.
oh yeah,
Thing
is invincible by now.
It is there. Yes, Letty is invincible.
Yes.
She's got an invisibility spell.
Very
cast on her
timely
by,
invulnerability.
by Christina, which means that she doesn't get caught up in the flames. Not only does she not get caught up in the flames, and very nice touch actually. She and the grandmother hold hands as flames consume everything around her.
That is horrible.
And
though.
even as they consume the grandmother, like her hands actually remain intact in Letty's hands.
Yeah,
because
she has
Letty
some kind of
aura.
AOE effect.
Yeah,
because the book is intact. Right?
AOE effect.
Yeah, the book is intact. The whole time I was like, the book.
Yeah. Clearly being protected by the, but then why isn't the Gram being protected?
But also again, Letty, I don't know, maybe she's not very smart. I don't know if she understands. She's about to see a human being burn alive right in front of her, while she could have just left the room and let that shit happen in a different room, right? Instead, she's like, no, I'm gonna stay here and watch you burn alive. Horrible.
I mean, yeah, but that was to make sure that she wasn't alone and to give her company in that last before she died. That was
but at what cost?
Grandmother, as it were.
It's a bit selfish of the grandmother, isn't it, to ask that of her?
Well, I mean, it's considering the selfless act of doing it. I don't think it's all that selfish.
Well,
no.
She was gonna die anyways. She just gave her the book.
Jonny's like, I'm off. I'm seeing you burning.
I'm nitpicking here. It's one of those like supernatural scenes where it's all a bit weird. So.
Oh yeah, definitely. I just again, it's one of those moments to just tie up another loose end, as we start kind of mixing together.
I mean, I think to me, the scene that really sort of epitomizes the show is when later on Letty is walking down the street and the Tulsa riots are in full swing and there are airplanes flying over dropping bombs.
Yeah.
Now there were ostensibly airplanes that there's a sort of dispute over the numbers. Like some say it was just a single guy in a private airplane. Others say there were multiple flying around throwing firebombs and whatnot. But they weren't actually like military drop bombs.
Right, like a full squad of
like you see here. But I think I did kind of have a problem with that, but I also understood the indictment of that symbolism.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand why it was there.
Well, we said at the time, it visually and thematically, it made sense. Although that part is not historically accurate. It's a way of reinforcing the point.
It's not literally historically accurate. Let's say it that. Let's say it like that. It's sort of accurate to the
as they say, it's
representation
directionally
of history or whatever.
Accurate.
Yeah.
Or interpretation of history.
The way people think about it.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean it's utterly heartbreaking, the whole thing.
Yeah.
Because you see this completely thriving community just wiped out overnight. For
all
no
the while,
discernible reason other than the fact that they were different.
Yeah, I don't know if there was something that,
I mean, there was an inciting event. Yeah. But
right.
But really, I mean, what underlies everything is just different,
for sure, for sure. Yeah, whatever it was the spark that was like
there was
a small thing compared
to the spark, as I remember it, is that there was a kid who got charged with being a little too fresh with a young white girl in an elevator.
Right.
And so he got arrested, and he was supposedly about to be lynched when a group of black protesters then showed up to try and protect him. And things escalated from there.
Right. And Hippolyta is holding the portal throughout a lot of this, right? So towards the end, she's just collapsing, and her hair goes.
And I should say that from what I remember, like the girl in the elevator later admitted that she made the whole thing up.
Oh, for what that's worth. At that
Yeah.
point already, it's like,
Oh yeah. It really doesn't matter after that point. The shit has already gone down. Things have already started. Trouble has already begun.
Yeah,
as
you
it were.
cannot. Sadly, you cannot close Pandora's box once it has
Right.
been opened.
Nope. No, you
but they
cannot.
do make it back, right, on a pretty tight.
Yeah, they do. Back
Yeah.
to Hippolyta, who's keeping the portal open, the time portal, and they make it back with the book so they can save D. But of course, they can't save D's arm, which has rotted away. Well, it's,
Right.
Which we will come to episode 10.
yeah, because then we move on to the finale, which sadly I think is the weakest episode of the season because there are just too many threads for them to sort of tie up. They've packed in too much here for it to really. I mean, after that whole, just the enormity of the Tulsa riots, like Christina taking off Atticus to sort of sacrifice him to become immortal,
Almost
doesn't really ring that high as a threat, right? Mm-hmm. Like it sort of pales in comparison to that. It's like going off. Oh, I just fought King Kong. Now there's Caesar from Planet of the Apes, right? Like it's
The moment we saw it, the first thing that popped into my mind was Rise of Skywalker. Simple as that. Because what it tries to do is force so many plot points into one episode that it'll have characters in places they shouldn't be, continuity-wise. It'll just force things into positions they shouldn't be, and it ends up being a bit of a naff ending, as you said. Not only because of the ending, literally itself, and what it is, but because of everything going on in the backdrop, which is far more serious than anything we're seeing on screen. Really, it's not the worst final episode of a series I've ever seen, certainly, but I just think everything becomes overt. Nothing is subtle anymore. Just the way that the whole ritual happens near the end. Atticus up on the apparatus with his wrist sliced open by Christina, and then
I mean we haven't really talked a lot about Christina so far.
Yeah,
but really she is ostensibly like the villain of the show and of season 1, as it were. But she's not really. I don't think she's really portrayed as such because they go to fairly great lengths to make her ambiguous.
She lived in the grey for a long time. Yeah,
to give her sort of sympathetic traits, and to like she doesn't really want to sacrifice. She doesn't want to sacrifice Atticus. It's a necessary component.
She needs it. Yeah,
to perform her ritual and for her to become immortal.
I think the way I viewed it is she simply has goals that are in conflict with what Atticus and the others are trying to do, and well, in this case also like she needs him, like his blood and stuff. But
and
it's not so much that she's opposed to them like personally.
Well, like Ruby as well, she's built up these relationships with certain characters, especially Ruby, who is her lover for long periods of the show.
Well, that's one thing I don't buy. Like one of the issues for me in the show is I don't buy for a second that Christina is actually in love with Ruby. Like I didn't get that. I still don't know why she stayed with Ruby for that long. I get the initial thing. It's like an experiment testing out the potion, right? And all that stuff. But like, are we supposed to believe what Christina is in love with Ruby?
I think in a very cold, detached way, she just kind of respects who she is and what she's trying to be, maybe. But I know what you mean. There's a distance there, as if she's being used for something.
I mean, I think I don't know how you want to qualify it. If you want to call it a crush or in love or what, but I think there's a genuine affinity there from Christina for Ruby. I think so. It's also because she's lonely. Christina is lonely, and I think
that's true.
She feels disconnected from people. I mean, that's why after she talks to Ruby and Ruby sort of indicts her on you don't feel anything, and she goes and she tries to sort of put herself through what Emmett Till was put through.
And we get tearing flesh sex as well. I mean,
and victimized in that way, so that you can feel something, or like try and sort of feel an echo of humanity, or however you want to call it. And I think Ruby is kind of her gateway to that. Ruby is kind of her gateway to humanity. Even as she sort of tries to transcend humanity, she still kind of wants to hold on to it and retain it a little bit.
Yeah,
that's a good point.
And if you kind of, I mean, whether you want to call that a crush or she's in love, I think I don't think those cover it entirely, but I think there's also that respect.
Affinity is the right word.
And
affinity
also that respect for also that respect for
Yeah.
Ruby's ambition. That Ruby, you know,
I think so.
She takes what she wants.
Yeah, but also like as a woman, she's always felt relegated to second place, right?
Yes. And
Christina does.
And that is something that she shares.
And that
with
connects
Ruby. Yes.
with what Ruby experiences. Only Ruby, you know, maybe more because she also has the racial aspect of it. But yeah, I think that's true. And you're right. She does go to extreme lengths to try to feel something, like, you know, getting like mauled by those guys and then thrown into the water, just to try to empathize with the kid.
Yeah.
That's quite brutal, but I found it quite funny as well at the moment, because you just chain, off he goes, like, wow, okay, that was quick. Brutal and to the point.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think.
But the problem is that after sort of building Christina up in this way as this ambiguous figure, she then kind of just becomes the unrelenting evil force that we're supposed to hate.
Yeah.
At the finale.
Well, at the end of the day,
it doesn't really work.
She still wants immortality over anything else, right? So when push comes to shove, she kills Ruby because she has to get the leg up on the other guys and make the spell work.
Well, she doesn't really have to, because I mean, William isn't dead, and neither is the other person. So she doesn't functionally really have to kill her.
Okay, well, that's more like technical, you know, like
but
practical details. Maybe she didn't have to kill her.
That's also why I kind of had an issue with that whole how that went down in terms of her killing Ruby. And it may or may not have been ambiguous whether she actually did, or whether she just said she did, so she could hurt Letty when she said it.
But ultimately, she chose the ritual over Ruby.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the.
And
I think this episode felt like an episode of Buffy again.
But it also that twist also rings false to me, because of it kind of feels out of character for Ruby to make that choice against Christina. Especially
but this is the
especially after the confrontation she has with Letty at the cemetery, where she.
I agree, and I think that Ruby hates herself for being weak and always giving into Letty, because she always has, and I think that, you know, once again she does, and now this time she's
I think that's a fair point.
Angrier at that,
absolutely.
but she's got that like weakness because it's family, right? And she ends up. I think it kind of is in the theme there. It sort of fits, but.
Right.
I think it's a bit of a letdown, because the reason I say I say this loosely.
Also, because it happens off camera. I mean, so we never get that we never get that catharsis or whatever you want to say from that. There doesn't come we don't get the payoff from that relationship after they've built it up. We just get Christina disguising herself as Ruby and then ingratiating herself with Letty and the others. And
that's the problem with the condensed notion of the episode. Then that's the real issue with this. It's the end of this film is like any other. I
mean, the only thing we really get
in a horror film you will ever see in your life, and that's the problem. It's tropey. It doesn't do. Prior to this episode, the whole series, for the most part, is experimental and interesting. It does borrow from other genres. We do have a haunted house episode. We do have Korean, Japanese ghost type creatures. We do have things we've seen before, but they're done in a different way and with a very particular tone. This totally moves away and shifts from that tone, and it becomes quite a schlocky, almost 80s kind of homage to a sacrificial horror, movie kind of thing. That kind of subgenre.
I think what epitomizes like all of your critique in terms of the density of the episode and them packing in too much is how so much really crucial information in this episode is conveyed in basically a flashing montage that lasts only a couple of seconds when GR connects Christina and Atticus.
Yeah.
And we see all these flashbacks, including the flashback that when Ruby throws Letty off the ledge and ostensibly kills Letty, she actually gives her back the invulnerability before she sort of hits the ground and before she dies. So she effectively saves Letty. And that information is only conveyed in like the blink of a flash in a montage where literally if you blink, you will miss it. And
I said to you at the time, it was like when Zack Snyder introduced the entire Justice League via emails in Batman v Superman. It was so quick. That information was like, here's Cyborg, he's a robot. It's like, and it's Flash, he can run fast, and you're like, what the hell just happened? Take more time to, I don't mind exposition if I need to know it. So tell me the things I need to know to make sure that thing relates to that thing.
Yeah, it's too dense, and there's too much for too little. Like you would have liked to see this spread over multiple seasons. Like 2 seasons should have been enough, I think. But I think they really struggled to get all this crammed into a single one, in 10 episodes.
Yeah.
And ultimately, the final payoff is that you're supposed to feel good because they're taking magic away from white people.
Yeah, it's just like Christina kills Atticus. It ends with Christina killing Atticus.
Right.
Ostensibly achieving immortality, and then Letty steps in and basically robs Christina of magic and white people everywhere of magic.
Right. Which, I mean, that's just the overcorrection of overcorrections, isn't it? It's taking the problem and applying it in the flip side.
My problem is that the entire construct of white versus black is artificial.
Yeah, it's not a binary.
It's exclusively a tool that's used to oppress people, to create us versus them. Race is not an actual biological construct; it's a social construct. Because what makes a white person white? I mean, Atticus is like the child of Hannah, who is Atticus's like great grandmother, who's the person who escaped from the Braithwaite Manor house. When she had her child, that child was half white because the father was Titus Braithwaite. So is that child white? Can a half white child use magic? What percentage of blood is pure enough in terms of being black that it can use magic and whatnot? And that's
what I'm saying. It's not a binary thing. It's
exactly.
So it doesn't make sense from a practical standpoint that there would be this way of telling, if white, then ignore or no magic, disable magic. You can't. It wouldn't make sense.
But of course, the point is that argument is kind of irrelative because that's not really the point that the show wants to make. It wants to be the power
I'm
fantasy.
saying that's besides my point. My point is, I think that she's applying the same oppression, and
Well, she is in a reverse,
horrible.
Absolutely.
In the other direction. So it's like saying, because the Jews in the Holocaust went through something unimaginable, they now have the right to do the same thing to the Nazis, which I don't want to get into because that's like really incendiary as a topic. But I'm just saying it's like a giant overcorrection in the other direction that I think is not the right call, in my opinion. But then also to claim that it's like an absolute good thing that was achieved there seems like people are accepting it on its face very easily.
Especially because we also get like the final scene, and also like during this episode while they go and confront Christina, it's worth bearing in mind that they leave Diana again. like completely alone
Yeah,
in the car, all by herself.
with the monsters anywhere.
Yeah, in a forest that's completely haunted by
Not like she's had
monsters.
problems
Now,
with
of course,
monsters or anything
she
before,
does.
being left on her
She
own.
does.
Jesus.
They do not leave her. To be fair, they do not leave her completely alone. She does have a babysitter, but still, like they just leave her in the car. Like it's like you kind of have to question why they even brought her. Like it's yeah, but
Yeah.
and then of course she gets assaulted by monsters. She gets protected by her babysitter, which is a larger monster summoned by Atticus that we didn't actually get to talk about, but we'll just leave that. And she then goes back and finds Christina buried under rubble, and then she murders Christina. And then the show ends.
With her T-100 arm that she got somewhere from Skynet in the future or the past that we don't know about.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, that her mother
in one of her
built for
travels, she learned how to do that.
Yeah.
We were both like,
No, that was mainly you, because I just went, fine. Like, it's okay. Like
we've gone past more absurd things at this point.
Probably in the episode, yeah. But again, it's just one of those things that's... I think part of the problem with the ending is that it treats its ending too simplistically when it could have been far more ambiguous and complex, which is often what I expect more with a series like this that's trying to deal with complex things. And I also think it's an easy ending. It's very, you can see it's rushed. It feels rushed because it comes to a head too quickly. All plot points meet too quickly. Things are forced in position too quickly. And then by the end, you've got things which just don't make real sense. And what could have been like a really big two-parter with a really elaborate ending kind of falls off the cliff just a bit. And because all the Lovecraft stuff is gone by then, kind of. It's much more of an obvious, typical, different kind of horror.
Yeah, there are no more portals and...
Yeah. Like, I would just see like a big Cthulhu creature in a big mystical black
just
cloud.
Kill everybody
something.
in the
yeah. Almost Stranger Things, you know, almost like that kind of ambiguous ending. But I think to me, this means this might not get a second series. I think it's done. I think not only is it.
I mean, I hope it's done. Like, I don't really want them to move further with it, but if they do, I will be interested to see what they do with it.
Maybe like many years in the future or something. Like taking this as a backdrop and then a new story, basically.
You could certainly move it into a different era. 70s or 90s and try something different with it, I think. But to continue this particularly, you've already forced the ending to cap it all off. So I don't think there's any way of really dragging it out to more episodes.
It felt like really standard where, the bad guy gets the immortality in the end, but they're going to get it back, right? Like they're going to, take it away. So it's like, in movies, so often you see this. The bad guy has this ultimate plan. Throughout the entire movie, you're fighting against it. At the very end, the bad guy achieves the goal. And yet, you beat him or her in his or her ultimate form. And that's the ultimate victory in some way.
Right.
So in this case, applied to here, Christina achieved immortality. But even then, they beat her at her best, which is supposed to be, the ultimate victory. But again, it's like this pretty standard package that's done in movies.
I also had two other issues with the ending, where the first one is with Hippolyta, where she basically gets nothing to do in the ending.
Yes.
Like she's I mean, why didn't she just stay in the car with Diana? Like, why does she even go there? Because she doesn't do anything in the actual confrontation.
She's the best player on the team.
Yeah.
And she's doing what?
Well, what did I say to you at the time? The very least she could have done in this episode is a Sam Raimi style making that arm for D montage.
And then you have
build a rocket, and I don't know, like
then
you have Gia, who who comes to America to help Atticus. And really, the only reason she's there is just so she can act as the link between Atticus and Christina.
Yeah.
And it just feels incredibly contrived. Like, the entire reason we
You
created
needed
this character
someone
was just to
with
put her
very
here
lengthy.
at this very specific time and this very specific place, so she could fulfill this very specific function.
Yeah, you have
Silver, it's
one
destiny.
purpose.
You
One
needed
purpose.
someone with very lengthy, furry limbs. And that was the only one
Yeah.
that could do it.
Fills a very oblong, weird-shaped gap. Just drop
Yeah.
it in
It
there.
just it just feels incredibly contrived.
Tentacle-shaped gap.
But I mean, overall, this is a show that I would definitely recommend people watch. It has a lot of really, really stellar episodes and episodes that offer perspectives that you're not going to see anywhere else.
Yeah, absolutely.
And are frequently very thought-provoking.
It's got wonderful aesthetic. The cinematography and camera work is outstanding at times. The way 1950s, particularly 54, when it started, is depicted, and its production values and set design is glorious. The performances are stellar across the board. Most episodes are absolutely fantastic and are inventive and different and play with the Lovecraft lore and the original book and elements like that. The only real point at which it doesn't entirely fall apart, but the only point at which really it's not that great is that final episode. There are other moments in various episodes, but most of them hold up in some way. But I really like some elements of it, and I think, as I said, in episodes 8 and 9, or 7 and 8 for me, they're so different, but they're so cool. That almost entirely cosmic episode, and then this properly horror episode, I love, and I think anyone who loves horror, loves Lovecraft, and can understand the metaphors being used and the history being discussed and the very topical expression of racism and interpretation of racism at that time in relation to now, we'll get a hell of a lot out of this show.
I don't even think you need like a deeper understanding of these things before you go into it, because the show really, one of the things I really enjoyed was the anachronism between the show uses a lot of later sort of monologues and speeches and songs and hip hop and whatnot.
We should say the music in this is mind-blowingly good at times.
In order to drive points home, like there is a poet, like when they do the initial ritual at Braithwaite Mansion, which the one that backfires and kills the cult.
With Samuel,
like there is a poetry reading of Whitey on the Moon, which is a poem about racial oppression and white privilege, and it basically indicts, look here they are, all these news anchors and whatnot talking about astronauts reaching the moon. Meanwhile, like, my sister just got bitten by a cockroach in the next room and is living in unimaginable conditions, while no one acknowledges it. Like, the show has a lot of scathing sort of juxtapositions like this. There's another one with Diana when she gets on her bicycle about like how invisible black girls and victimized little black girls are, and the continuous use of this I found to be immensely effective, and can really sort of send you down, if you haven't already, send you down a rabbit hole of reading people like James Baldwin or others, to sort of inform yourself deeper. I think it can be a really, really good entry point for people to gain a broader understanding of these issues.
Yeah, it's like a more populist, mediated understanding, obviously, but you can take that and then dive into the history and understand the politics a lot more. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. Thought it was a breath of fresh air as a series. It had a wonderful tone. As a horror guy, I really enjoyed a lot of it. Just wish that ending had been a little bit better.
Yeah. The one thing that stays with me is how much each episode feels like its own thing. It's got its theme, right? Yeah. Each episode. And yet it is cohesive as a whole, right? The overarching narrative moves along in a way that makes sense, kind of. Again, it rushed at points, but it does connect well. Because what you see a lot of times is when they do this in shows, there's this disconnect between episodes, where, because the theme is so different, it's almost like the story, you don't know where it's at.
You
like,
get these shifting tones, which
what's going on?
Yeah,
and here it's like it evolves nicely, I think, whilst still achieving this effect.
Yeah, definitely. Well, that is Lovecraft Country, and I think we all had a bloody good time with it. A good romp, as it were. Check it out if you can. Like I said, it's just the final episode that goes off a bit wonky, really, but the rest is really, really good. There's so much good stuff to enjoy in this series. Right, well, we have been the Last Edit Podcast. Thank you very much, Mr. Johnny Plays Live.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me,
Be sure
folks.
to stop by his channel every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday.
Yeah.
Good
Twitch and YouTube, guys. He does all kinds of stuff in music. I'll put the links in the box down below. And Silver and I shall see you very, very soon with some movie podcasts that we are working on.
Be careful about promising things, but we hope.
Sometime this year. Maybe. Possibly. Yeah. Right, I've been Citizen Sleeve, and this has been my amazing friend,
Silver Hawkins.
And finally, thank you once again for joining us, Mr. Johnny Plays Live.
Johnny.
Take it easy, folks. We'll see you in the next podcast.
Take care.
Bye-bye.